All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the December meeting of the Workforce Development Board. I apologize for a bit of a late start, but we do have a really packed schedule today. So, highlights for today. We're going to get updates from SBS and DYCD. We will have elections for the chair and vice chair. And then we're going to devote about an hour to our conversation about hybrid practices that started at the last meeting.
And thanks everybody for having patience with this new space. It's obviously a beautiful space. We have coffee and bagels right outside the door. There are restrooms. You go out the door just to the left and then hang a right. They're kind of over on the right-hand side over there. So thanks for adapting to the new space.
Okay, so we'll get started. We're going to start with an update on the WIOA youth programs from Megan Keenan-Berryman, who is the Assistant Commissioner of WIOA programs at the New York City Department of Youth and Community Development. There is a memo in section 1 of your board book on page 5, but for now I'll turn it over to Megan.
Good morning, thank you. Good morning, everybody. As Marie said, there's lots and lots of goodies in our memo, so I won't go through it all, but I will give you three quick updates on workforce-related items that we are working on. The first is that our Work, Learn, and Grow program kicked off in October for this year. I believe this is the 4th year that we've run this program. The program is designed to help young people who participated in last summer's SYEP continue to work and build their skills over the school year. We've gotten a lot of feedback over the years that, kids do like a 6-week job and then that's sort of it, and then what happens over the school year. So this is an attempt to bridge that gap for them during the school year. We expect to serve over 4,200 young people this year at 50 providers and work over 1,200 work sites throughout the city. And young people work 10 hours a week. And they'll be doing that through March. The other thing that we did recently in November was we released a concept paper in collaboration with the Unity Project and the New York City Center for Youth Employment.
Can I ask a question about the first?
Sure.
So 4,200
Yeah.
out of 130,000, or how many folks did you serve last time?
Yes.
So how do they get selected?
So there is an additional lottery, they apply, and there is an additional lottery, yeah. And it is limited to young people who are in school, but that is most of our SYEP participants.
And so how many apply for the lottery?
I don't know offhand.
10,000, 20,000,
I don't think it's a huge number. I don't think it's enormous. It's also, it's an initiative of the city council, so every year, we get our funding and we base the number of slots that we can provide based on that number, obviously.
And they work in different places than where they worked in the summer?
Not necessarily, and that's the other sort of nice thing about it, is that it allows our providers and employers to continue and have continuity through the school year if employers want to do that, and many of them do. So it's a nice way to keep them engaged through the school year also. All right, so moving on again, we released a concept paper for Unity Works program, which is being developed in collaboration with New York City Center for Youth Employment and the Unity Project. The target population is going to be LGBTQI youth who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. They're very overrepresented in our RHY programs, and we are making an attempt to try to reach them with a very robust employment and training program. The program is going to look a lot like our out-of-school youth program, which is very comprehensive, provides work readiness training, occupational skills training, paid work experiences, lots of supportive services. It will last up to 2 years with a year of follow-up, lots of assistance with housing if that's needed, and we expect to release an RFP for that program in January. That's it.
Any questions? No.
Actually, one question.
One quick question.
Sure.
Do you have data on how many students that complete SYEP actually get hired by the companies that employ them during the summer? In other words, where the companies are actually putting the bills?
I believe we have data of that kind for ladders for leaders, which is a little bit a smaller program. I can certainly ask if we keep that data for the larger pool of, yeah.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Megan. All right, so we will now hear an update on the WIOA adult programs from Lucinda Glover. She is the Deputy Commissioner of the Workforce Development Division of the New York City Department of Small Business Services. There is a memo in section 1 of your board book on page 10 that addresses some updates, but I will turn it over to Lucinda.
Thank you. Apologies for my voice, I'm a little sick, so also won't say too much, but in terms of the Workforce One career centres, we're in a better position than we were a year ago. We're on track in terms of where we need to be at this point in the year with our work to connect people to jobs. So this increase compared to last year is more a reflection of the challenges we were facing last year as we were entering a new contract period at the end of the first quarter. In terms of training programs, we've had quite a significant uptick in training enrollments, which is primarily driven by a customized training award where we are providing a grant to a business to train around 300 employees on the job. If you look at the tech training section, we've had 5 graduates of the Web Development Fellowship are now in full-time tech jobs with an average salary of $93,130, which is fantastic. Going down to the industrial and construction training highlights, we had 12 new cohorts launch in the first quarter with 118 new enrollments. It was a very busy first quarter for us. We had 142 people completing training in that quarter, particularly for the new board members. Sometimes completion and enrollment numbers don't entirely align because we have people who started in an earlier quarter complete in the first quarter. In terms of media and entertainment, we had 14 trainees graduate from the Made in New York post-production program. That program has a really great completion rate in terms of all of the trainees seeing it through to the end. And in terms of those who have been placed since the training, the average wage is $20 an hour. And we also had some information here on the 4 businesses that were awarded customized training program grants that are fully board meeting. But that's it. Let's take any questions.
Yes.
So you had mentioned that you saw an uptake as part of the training result of the grant that was given. What was the amount of the grant?
Good question. I don't have that information on me, but I can get back to you.
Okay.
Can you say a little bit more about the Data Analyst Training Accelerator, the new program? That sounds interesting.
It is a new program. I don't have anyone from our training team here to speak to it, unfortunately. So again, I can provide you with more.
Lucinda, there's a very impressive surge in the productivity of the Workforce One Center.
Thank you.
I mean, really, it's great. Can you say a little bit more about what's going on there, other than just the new contract a year ago compared to now? But the benefit is really the total hires is up 60%. I remember everyone said increasing the minimum wage is going to really reduce employers' interest in hiring folks, but we're not experiencing that at all.
Yeah, so as I said, we're on track where we need to be for this year. The hires that the centers directly connected people to is up by 21% compared to last year. There's also been a significant uptick in terms of people who access some of our services, might be a resume workshop, support on how to do self-directed job search, those sorts of things, and then they are themselves directly connecting to a job. So that 60% increase is in part through what we call self-placements. But I think I've talked about it in every meeting that we've had, whether it's the executive or the bigger broad meeting, about the impact that the new contract period had in terms of our performance, because we had vendors managing these centres and staff turnover. So, I mean, it's a lot of it is just the difference between not having dramatic change across 18 Workforce One centres. My team had a lot of vacancies a year ago. We still do, but the team has doubled compared to where it was a year ago. So just more stable conditions, more hands contact to manage it day to day.
So Lucinda, going back a few earlier years, how does it compare prior to the disruption?
We've maintained the same goals that we've had for years. So when I say that we're on track, I can't tell you exactly in each year where they were at this point in the year, but we did close 3 Workforce One centres in the summer of 2018. So we're doing the same amount with fewer centres.
Do you have so you're comparing this year to last year, do you also have an internal plan in terms of, we want to make 5,000 direct hires?
Mm-hmm.
And is that something that could be shared going forward in these reports? Or is that internal and you prefer not to?
No, that's okay. We have 25,000 is our annual mayor's management report. That's our overall goal for the system, and it's comprised of the vast majority of those hires. We look to the Workforce One centres to produce directly, so a little over 18,000. And then, as I said, we know that a certain number of people that we serve will then be successful in getting job placements on their own. And then we also factor in the employment that's achieved for the people that go through our trainings and then get a job at the end of those trainings.
In addition to the wage uptake, do you have anything else you can tell us about is there anything different about these jobs that we're seeing people get placed in or get themselves?
We haven't done a granular analysis of the types of jobs yet, but it has been harder to find the right kind of mid-level jobs. Obviously, with the minimum wage going up, there's a lot of jobs that pay $15 an hour, but in terms of the business development, it's been a little bit of a challenge to get the system to have tiered wages and entry-level positions that they're looking for.
Any other questions?
I guess just a question along the lines around the wage. So currently it's showing the $16.56. Do you anticipate that that's going to continue at that level, peak, or even come down as more people are hitting the market? If you're talking about the entry-level jobs, or the $15 an hour jobs, are there going to be people going into those positions that's going to actually pull that average down?
No, I would expect it to continue to climb a little bit as we continue to manage the system, to work harder and harder to get more mid-level jobs. It's certainly my aim.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so SBS has requested a transfer of funds from the dislocated worker funding to the adult funding. Chris Neal is going to walk us through that request, but the resolution can be found in your board book in section 2 on page 16.
Okay, so those of you at the last meeting will remember that we had a similar resolution to transfer funding from administrative dollars on the youth side into program dollars. This is different. This is a different kind of request. Excuse me. So just as context, the city gets about $60 million a year in Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funding from the federal government. And about 2/3 of that, about 37 million goes, or sorry, yeah, 37 million goes to small business services, and the balance goes to the Department of Youth and Community Development in terms of youth funding. For adults, we have 2 buckets of money that we get. We get money for adults, and then we also get money for a subset of adults called dislocated workers, which is defined as essentially people who've been laid off from a job or who've been informed that they're going to be laid off from a job and who are unlikely to return to their previous occupation. And so when customers go into the Workforce One Career Centers, at the point of intake, they are assessed and they're put into one of those 2 categories. Now the services are available to everybody. All the services are available to customers regardless of whether they fall into the adult or dislocated worker bucket. So that's the context. So what SBS is proposing to do is to move $4 million from their adult funding into dislocated worker funding. So the current adult funding, and this is for
the other way around. Taking money out of dislocated worker.
Did I say it wrong?
Yeah.
We're taking, okay, sorry, yes. Taking money from dislocated worker funding and putting it into the adult bucket. So dislocated worker would be reduced from 12 million to 8 million, and adult funding would be increased from 19 million to 23 million. The administrative budget would remain the same. So why? Why would we do this? Well, there's a pretty simple explanation for it, which is that the WIO money comes in as a formula, and every state gets a big chunk of money based on a federal formula, and then within every state, local areas also get money based on a formula. And so New York City doesn't have any control over what we get. So our money for this period, which was program year 2018, was 38% dislocated worker and 62% adult. But when you look at the customers actually walking through our doors, we don't see that many. We see, it hovers between 20 and 30% of our customers are dislocated workers. And so for this period, it was 26%, right? And so there's a couple things. Number one, within the context of WIOA, any local area is allowed to transfer up to 100% of its dollars from dislocated worker to adult, or vice versa. So if you think about, you know, a steel belt city where there's huge layoffs in a town, maybe those local areas want to spend all their money on dislocated workers, right? We're New York City. This is the group of customers that we get, and so, you know, our labor market might look a little different than a small city in the steel belt. The other piece to note is that no customers would be denied services as a result of this proposed transfer. This is just a right sizing of the money to the customers. Does that make sense?
I
So in other words, if you're a dislocated worker, you'll get services no matter what.
Exactly. Exactly. Doesn't change that. It just means, and I like to point at diagrams. Right now, we can't get reimbursed for this amount, right? We get reimbursed by the state of New York for the money that we spend, and this money really, most of it goes to the Workforce One Career Centers. If we don't do this, we're not going to get paid back for this because our money's going to be tied up with dislocated workers. Does that make sense? So this balance, we just need to right size this, and again, no customers would be denied, no dislocated workers would be denied services as a result of this change. So this is.
Can I ask a question about the actual customers? Is that, when you say it's current, is that this quarter or last year, or what time period is that?
Yeah, that is 11 months of essentially fiscal year 2019. That's my understanding. So it was July through the end of May. So it's a pretty good reflection of what how the year would end. And honestly, this is something that we typically have to do every year because the money never really matches the customer flow. And in the past, we would address this in the executive committee of the board, but the State Department of Labor passed a policy in the last year that requires the full board to vote on this kind of transfer.
Do these transfers affect next year's allocation?
No.
The targets, the goals?
Nope.
That formula stays.
Yeah, the formula in terms of how the money comes, we'll probably get 38% again in dislocated worker dollars. But it doesn't change the goals themselves. Any other questions?
Okay, so do I have a motion to pass the resolution?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? All right, resolution. All right, so we're going to move to some board business. We have meeting minutes from October 31st that the board needs to vote on. They're in section 2 of the board book on page 17. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the October 2019 board meeting?
One thing, I think, it has December 15th, 2018 as the minutes.
Oh, so there's a mistake here too.
210, I think.
Where's that?
Oh, and the ones that,
Not page 19.
yeah.
Is that not correct? It says
No, it would have
2018.
been the June 2019 quarterly.
Yeah,
minutes.
June 20, yeah.
Thank you. Good catch.
So do we need to write it up again?
I think you can make it contingent upon us changing the minutes.
Good catch. Okay, so I guess, do I have contingent on changing the minutes? Do I have a motion to pass, yes, approve the minutes from the actual, thank you. I can't get that sentence out clearly. I have a motion, do I have a second? All in favor? Okay. The minutes have been approved. All right, we're going to move on to elections. So as you guys all know, I think, that today will be my last meeting as chair of the board. And I'm not one for speeches, but I do want to say that it really has been an honor to serve as chair of the board for the last 3.5 years. And I can't have this be my last meeting without thanking everyone who's on the board. A special thank you to SBS and DYCD. I really admire all the hard work you guys do, day in and day out, and it makes a huge difference in the lives of New Yorkers, so thank you. I also want to thank my colleagues on the executive committee. It's been really great working with you guys. I will continue on the executive committee. And most of all, I want to thank Chris Neal. Nothing would get done on this board without Chris, I have to say. So thank you, Chris. We appreciate everything you've done. Okay. So we will hold elections today for chair and vice chair. The nominees are listed in the board book in section 3 on page 24. For the position of chair, we have one member who is nominated and accepted that nomination, Audrey Powell. Audrey, would you like to speak for a minute about why you'd like to serve as board chair?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So, I think for me, coming from cooperative home care and being in a space where job quality and investment in the workforce is so central to who we are, the opportunity to be on this board and serve with all of you to really take those kinds of pivotal pieces of who we are and bring them more citywide feels like an incredible opportunity. And listening to Larissa talk about, working with SBS and CYD, I feel like, there's really an opportunity to take those kinds of best practices in creating quality and jobs for some of the most marginalized people who work in jobs that may be low wage, minimum wage, tend to be, and are basically in positions where they may be invisible. I want to be part of this board in order to sort of elevate that and bring those job quality improvements citywide on a level where it's scalable.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to name Audrey Powell as the chair of the New York City Workforce Development Board?
Motion.
Do we have a second? All in favor? All right, congratulations. We look for the position of vice chair, we have one member who is nominated and accepted the nominations, and that's
We
our...
should do a mental health check.
That's our current vice chair, who's willing to continue on, and that's Mark Elliott. Mark, would you like to speak for a minute about why you'd like to continue serving as board vice chair?
Sure. Well, a little bit about my background. I've been on the board, I think, 12 years, nominated first by Bloomberg and then de Blasio. Earlier in my career, I was deputy budget director for the city of New York and oversaw SBS and NYC, among other agencies, under Mayors Cox and Dinkins. Then went to the Ford Foundation, and for the last 20 years, I've worked on designing and evaluating promising workforce development strategies to help low-income people move up. We're probably best known for our work demonstrating that skills training really can make a difference for low-income people. There's been a consensus, people may find it difficult to believe, but there's been a consensus among the researchers and policy wonks in this area that skills training for poor people did work. And we should really push a work first kind of agenda. So we've been able to prove that it can work and can make a very large difference in people's lives. So I try to bring that knowledge of what's going on nationally into conversations we have in the executive committee, occasionally here at the full board meeting. I enjoy understanding what's going on with WIOA and what the agencies are trying to do. And so I'm happy to serve another term. I guess I was surprised to be forced to run for re-election.
It's my fault, I'm sorry.
No, that's, thank you for your chairing the board the last 4 years. It's been a pleasure. The only other thing I'll mention is that we made a pretty significant contribution to the board in kind, probably $25,000 worth of staff time in designing and analyzing the gig survey, which we hope to publish. So that's
Thank you, Mark. Do I have a motion to name Mark Elliott the vice chair of the New York City Workforce Development Board? Second. All in favor? Congratulations. Okay.
Thank you, Louise, for all your.
Thank you. You're welcome. shift to our main agenda item for today's meeting, high road employer practices. And I apologize for missing the last board meeting, at a work emergency, but I hear that we had a very lively discussion, and we're going to continue that discussion today. So we're going to start with Chris providing some background and a refined set of practices for the board to consider, and then I will facilitate a conversation among the board about how we want to proceed. So if you go to, yes, 27 of the board book in section 4, you can see the high road practices, and I will turn it over to Chris right now.
So I wanted to take a little bit of time to set the stage. I know we talked about high road practices last time, but I wanted to make sure to provide a little bit maybe more clarity about why we're doing this and what we're hoping to accomplish and how. I'm really excited to have this conversation because I think we really are trying to give the board a sense of choice about the direction that we want to take. And so I am trying to be a resource and provide information and ideas, but I'm trying not to sort of steer things in a very particular direction. So, what are the objectives? Why are we doing this? I think we've talked about this, but I think that people have responded well to this idea of the board becoming a champion of high road employer practices that benefit workers while also improving the competitiveness of businesses. Okay. It's God calling, he approves. She approves, sorry.
They approve. Is it your phone?
Not my phone.
It'll go to voicemail.
Under whose computer logic?
Oh,
Well done.
you did it. Just press some random button.
Thank you, Claudia. Well played. All right, so we have approval from higher authorities. But so in terms of becoming a champion of high road employer practices, we wanted to leverage the unique composition and expertise of the Workforce Development Board. So this is a business majority board that is required in the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act law, but we also have a very good mix of labor and nonprofits and city agencies. And then we wanted to design and execute an initiative to persuade businesses throughout New York City to adopt these practices, and wanted to also, we want to set and track progress towards the goals that we set. So why do this? Well, one of our primary goals on the board is to help New Yorkers land good jobs with family-supporting wages, right? And the current programs that WIOA funds, they achieve this by providing access to training, access to college, connections to jobs. But another way to achieve this would be to convince businesses to change the nature and the quality of their jobs, right? It's a kind of systems change, but it's changing the nature of jobs. And Chauncey, I don't know, you may know a little something about this, but 2 days ago, I found a really interesting report that I want to get into further, but Gallup, which is known for polling, and has support from Lumina Foundation, which is where Chauncey works. It surveyed more than 6,600 workers on various dimensions of job quality. They have an index of 10 different factors on job quality. What they found was that less than half of all the workers who responded to the survey are in good jobs, and that was based on how satisfied they were with various elements of their job. But for workers in the bottom fifth of earnings, it was even lower. It was 28%. So there appears to be, at least from this evidence, a job quality problem, right? And this is U.S. This is in the U.S. and we could consider doing something similar in New York City. But workers are not satisfied about the quality of their jobs. In addition to that, so if that's a need to address, there's a growing body of evidence that high road employer practices can both improve job quality for workers and increase the competitiveness of businesses. So our approach is to choose a set of employer practices that we want to champion. We talked about this last time, that we then want to look within. In other words, explore implementing one or more of these practices within our own organizations. And then finally, promote externally. So promote the adoption of high road strategies primarily among for-profit businesses in the city of New York. Just a little bit of background about this particular list and how it was developed. So I reviewed a number of different frameworks on job quality. A number of these do exist, and what I tried to do was come up with a, hi George, how are you? Come up with a manageable list, not a super long list, a manageable list. It's a list of 10. And there were a lot of different things that were correlated with retention of entry-level workers, reducing turnover, but what seemed to make sense was to select a set of practices that did one of two things. Either could lead to a wage increase for workers, and whether that's an actual salary increase or additional benefits that would, essentially be like a wage increase, and or that it would help individuals prepare for and connect to a new or better job. So those were sort of the main filters that I ran these practices through. So, and we had talked previously about voting on a handful, voting on several, but in a really good conversation that we had in the executive committee last week, the executive committee felt strongly that we need more choices. It's not enough just to say these are the 3 or 4 that we want to promote, but we need more choices so that we can be more inclusive of more types of businesses and cast a wider net, right? So small businesses might respond to some of these differently. Businesses in different sectors may respond to different things differently. So I think the sort of compromise solution we arrived at was to come up with a list that wasn't too long, but long enough, and not to whittle it down, but to determine if each and every one of the practices on the list makes sense. So the activity then for today, the task, is to discuss and debate whether these are the right set of practices and whether they're framed correctly or whether we would want to change how they're framed. And then we will vote on each practice in turn. So we're not going to vote for our top 3. We're going to go through each one of the 10 and say, should this stay on the list or should it not stay on the list?
Chris, can you just go back one slide? I want to review. Okay. Thank you.
Does that make sense to everybody? Is that clear?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we want to come up with a menu, but we want to make sure that the items on the menu are the right items.
Chris, one question. Why limit this to only for-profit businesses? Why not nonprofit organizations and government workers? Is it a conflict of interest with our role?
It's not a conflict of interest. We certainly could.
We should.
Yeah,
Government should lead by
yeah,
example, so.
I agree.
I think I was approaching this from the perspective of, with businesses, there is a clear thing to measure in terms of increased profitability or, that sort of thing. You don't get that in the nonprofit sector, but you could see improved retention, lower turnover, increased productivity,
Efficiency.
improved outcomes. So, I mean, that's something for the board to consider, but I think that's, we certainly could.
Well, some of the city's largest employers are nonprofits, right?
Yeah.
Universities, hospitals, you know, and in some cases, they don't look that different from for-profits.
Right.
You know, so I think it's a good idea.
Well, at the end of the day, they're employers, right? I mean, stating the obvious, but
Right.
you're employing people, you have an obligation to the people you're employing.
So here's the list of 10. This is also on page, what was it, 27? Yeah, 27, same list, slightly different format. I named these categories to try to have sort of a sense of what each would do, but I'll just run through them quickly. So for wages and benefits, the 3 practices. One was paying above the industry average, so paying a salary that's above the industry average, offering paid vacation, and offering health care benefits above and beyond what is required by law. In the categories of training and advancement, provide education and training for workers, including tuition assistance programs that lead to wage increases for workers and benefits for the business. And create clear opportunities to advance and or fill more internal openings by promoting entry-level employees. We had 4 under hiring and diversity. We decided to split these up. I think these were combined when we last talked about this, but they include hiring participants from public workforce development programs and various providers that serve New Yorkers, hire recent career technical education high school graduates, hire recent CUNY graduates, and help cultivate future workers by providing opportunities for career exploration and work experience for high school and college students. And then the final category, worker autonomy and ownership, provide opportunities for employee ownership, such as profit sharing, stock options, etc.
Can you talk a bit about what we'll do after we vote? So we're not voting to adopt these practices, we're voting to explore the practices last we discussed.
So there's another stage of due diligence that we need to do to make sure there's evidence behind each of these. And we also need to think through what can the board actually do? What does it look like for the board to promote each of these? And so that's sort of the next phase of this in my mind.
Okay, so I have a question. We have the WIOA local plan, and we have some target populations that we wanted to focus on to assist in connecting to good jobs. How do those target populations connect to this?
We could consider making them the target populations a priority for public workforce program hires.
Okay.
Actually, do you want to read the list of target populations?
Sure.
For everybody's benefit?
Veterans, young adults, individuals with disabilities, foreign-born New Yorkers, individuals with a lack of basic educational credentials, individuals with arrest or conviction records.
So that's part of the local plan that the board passed a couple of years ago. So we could certainly make those part of whom we're targeting for.
Yeah, would we see that as part of number 6, do you think? Or
Yeah,
would that
yeah.
I would think, and then I think it's a matter of collecting data, doing a lot of education of employers and workforce programs to increase the hiring, to maybe overcome some stigma.
And where you would find those.
I can help you with individuals with disabilities.
Yeah,
In terms of educating companies.
There, we do that. Yeah,
Would it fall in all of the hiring and diversity buckets? And
I don't know. I mean, I know that individuals with disabilities are particularly twice as likely to be unemployed, twice as likely to be poor. And So I feel very strongly that that's a group that should be focused on. Not to overlook anyone else, but I think that people with disabilities get overlooked quite easily.
I heard news this morning that there's thousands of students at CUNY. for
Hi,
example.
yeah, this is Monica.
Right. And so,
Sorry, Monica.
Yeah, and I also turn it.
go ahead.
That also,
Ignore this.
so certainly, focusing or targeting individuals with disabilities can certainly fall into number 8, hiring graduates.
Right, that was what I was suggesting, that we could also focus in on those groups within each of these buckets. I would assume that people with disabilities would be at technical schools.
That's right.
Right.
Right, and I guess I want them to be included because that way there's data collected and we can see whether or not people with disabilities are being ignored or not.
I wonder if we should just explicitly state, that's something we can explore, whether we need to explicitly state our target population.
Thank you.
Any other comments before we start kind of going through line by line?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't here for the last meeting either, so I apologize. But yeah, I think I share your question about, is this a rating system that we then like rate employers by? Is it something that we just give to employers to encourage them? Is it all the above?
Well, we talked a lot about this at our executive committee meeting, like what is the goal? What do we want to try to accomplish with this list? And we all felt like, A, we needed more information, we needed data to show that they were effective in accomplishing the goals we wanted to accomplish. But I think where we landed was we wanted to promote these practices and be in a position to show why businesses, and I guess now, government, whoever the employer is, can benefit by adopting these practices. So both employees and employers will benefit.
The goal
Does that
was,
answer your question?
yeah, the goal was to focus on the board's efforts, to look down this list and expand the list and see, yeah, well, I do that, or I can do that, or this is something that works for me, or there's no way I can do that. And to have a selection for us as individual firms to utilize.
Right, we will be the kind of the guinea pigs on all of these practices. We will say whether we think they'll work for us and then kind of provide the case why others should also adopt.
And is the thinking, if we're open to it, that we would share our information?
Yeah, yep.
But there's a set of data behind all of these practices that are being considered, right?
That's the next step. The next step is to focus on what we're going to analyze and get data for.
My recollection from the last meeting was twofold. Wanted to see ourselves as ambassadors relative to these practices, and then second, to raise awareness for other employers that they might, we talked about employers that are intentionally looking to subscribe to these kinds of practices, and those that aren't aware that these are high road practices, that we can be ambassadors and raise awareness of why this is important. And there's some we'll never convert, but there's some that we probably can convert through our ambassadorship and by raising awareness.
And going back to Chris's presentation, one thing I would say to keep in mind, when we looked at the statistic of 44% said they were in good jobs, and then when you take it to, the lower fifth of earners, it drops to, there's only 28% that are identifying as having a good job. I would encourage us to really look at evaluating that shift of people saying, now that these practices are in place, or what my employer is doing is helping me now feel like I'm in a good job. There's a measurement there that we need to pay attention to. I think particularly the worker satisfaction, there are studies and there are reports that show that that increases productivity. When people feel they have agency and voice and they're invested in, that's gonna increase overall productivity within the organization. So paying attention to the way that workers see their jobs as good quality jobs is gonna be particularly important.
So the Gallup report was just like a subjective, like measure of worker satisfaction? I
don't think it, no, I heard Chris saying that there were 10 points that they were measuring, and I'm just,
You're just saying that worker satisfaction.
we're gonna look at two things around advancing wages or advancing into a better job. Let's also think about looking at how people see their job as quality or not quality.
Yeah.
Okay, any other general comments before we start going down the list?
I have actually a question for Lucinda. To what extent would these apply to what the workforce fund centers are doing when they're working with employers on developing opportunities for people who are coming in? Would this kind of thing apply to them as a school?
I mean, we could certainly take a look and consider how we would apply it in terms of taking the first one, pay above the industry average. The discussion earlier, our aim is to try and provide a range of wage options so that we can provide a good match for job seekers, and we set targets that are based on industry average to try and make sure that we have enough in that category. And we factor in benefits in terms of if it's a part-time job, we require that the salary is a little higher to line up with the living wage requirements. The education and training is in our requirement in terms of jobs that we work on, but we have the customized training program to support businesses providing that for workers. Public workforce we don't, yes, although not necessarily seen as such by everyone. And we don't label candidates, so to speak, so we work with targeted populations, veterans, justice involved, as well as work youth, but we don't present them to employers as being such. We present them as the best candidates that we can source for them in New York City. But I think, we would certainly look at what the board decides and see how we support it.
I guess I'll just make a broad comment that it strikes me that for all the work we do here, coming from a private business, sometimes it doesn't feel super tangible, kind of the way we can affect change. And I feel like this is a nice way that maybe brings it a little closer to us, a way that we as a group can maybe start to affect some real change.
One other thing I would add is if we're sharing data, we have targets, what could we as a group do? We've done this with summer youth employment, all sort of pull together and say, hey, can we hire this many of this type or candidate or have internal promotion goals or what have you. Use some internal peer pressure before we start looking outside.
Okay, all right, well, why don't we start going through the list? And we should just talk about each one and then vote about whether or not we want to keep it on the list. So let's start with the first one, wage and benefits. Pay above industry average.
I feel like, I'm not sure, industry average is just so, like, I'm just thinking of my own company, right? So I work at a tech company and we definitely don't pay above industry average, because industry average is high. But I think we offset it by doing a lot of the other things. So I guess, like, I feel like, I don't know if pay above industry average as much as, like, there's just some sort of, like, wage fairness, right? Like, some sort of basic.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We don't have mics.
Try to project more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if industry average is always the best measure, basically, is all I'm arguing for. Which is not to say that we shouldn't subjectively pay people well, but.
I mean, I actually agree with you. When I look at industry average, I think, who's going to calculate the industry average? How will they calculate the industry average? And, you know, and then what are the metrics that will be used? There's so many different industries, right, in New York City, so it would be difficult. But I agree that there is a way to state this that would accomplish goals, that would improve wages, right? But you know, open to suggestions.
So one thought would be that we pay a living wage to the lowest paid workers. That's at least the start, or if we don't want to go that far, at least within 5% or some number. And then the second would be looking that we, sort of through an equity lens, making sure gender, race, whatever lens you look at, that the company is paying equitably.
Like equal pay,
Yeah.
which was just passed in the state of New York, or revised the law. Right, it used to be, I think the law has recently changed so that it's equal pay for substantially similar work, which is a big change in the state of New York. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. So it's something we could consider. Any other suggestions on this one?
Well, I hear Dave's comment as an additional item for this equity thing within the workforce. Right? So to me, that's not capturing what we have already. It's a different kind of way of assessing the compensation. So, which I like. That, I think we may, if we want to, if that's important, then we should include it. Because it's a very big issue, gender and racial differences in compensation.
So I guess one question I have on this is if companies are already required to do this stuff, do we add it to the list? Because what additional?
What are they required to do?
I mean, I don't know how the law will be interpreted, so I'm not going to pretend I do,
Right.
but they are required to pay equal amounts for comparable work. I would say substantially similar work, right? And so then what else can we do on that front by adopting it?
It's almost like number 0 is adhere to all.
Yeah, right. Comply with the law. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Don't discriminate, right? I mean.
I'm just curious how that law is actually going to be enforced. Are they?
I mean, through lawsuits, probably.
But
So anybody who went to the Employment Training Coalition, someone presented on the kind of women equity measure that they're now using on the stock exchange. And just looking down, I don't know that anything else here we haven't talked about, like paid family leave and stuff like that. So maybe it's more of a general, having something related to women and equality and other things. And I'm not an expert, but I thought the presentation was amazing. So they looked at a bunch of different indicators that showed that people were treating women fairly.
They were treating them fairly.
that was they came up with a measurable indicator to have that. Does anyone else want to talk about it?
There was a Bloomberg gender
Ah,
equity.
yeah.
I can send you the.
So maybe it's a good item to do some more work on.
Okay. So we'll make it 0.
I guess if we have some way of interpreting that into a way that companies can actually, right, either be more thoughtful about it or check themselves against it, or because while that may be a law, we know it's not the reality.
Right.
Right, so however if there's some way we can create as part of this a way of encouraging and or giving a way for companies to succeed at that.
You mean saying,
Yeah.
we know you're not doing it, but you might want to?
Or maybe providing a best practices, like
Yeah.
this is how you make sure you're really,
That's a great idea.
yeah,
And highlighting companies that make the change.
or
Take it
adopt the
on and
practice,
adopt it.
right.
Adopting the practices that's like, so, when did you stop eating your wife?
No, not
Everybody-
really.
Never on.
Oh my God.
It's a terrible, it puts people in by adopting those practices, it implies that they weren't doing it before.
No, but I think that the best practices are constantly evolving, and so you could just say, like, today, these are viewed as the best practices to make sure that you are really, like, looking at these issues across these different sectors. There are different things you can do to say whether or not you're actually paying fairly, equally, and not discriminating.
And how many companies have done their own self-assessment to determine if that's the case?
And
I
what's
think
the
it's just
timeframe?
Yeah.
My own comment is in the hospitality industry, we are bound by collective bargaining agreements, So essentially, you can't pay anyone less than what they are required, because of the unions. So just keep that in mind.
And I guess my thought as we look at all of this is that not everything is going to apply to my individual organization.
Right.
So the idea is to figure, for the things that do apply, that's what I would focus on. That's how I'll do it.
Okay, so should we change this? Should we, I think we should vote on something here. Should we, on this, what we've been talking about, pay equity, we'll call it, are we all in favor of exploring an item where we would provide some sort of recommendation on best practices with respect to pay equity, or suggestions on how to ensure that we're complying with the laws related to pay equity? Is that something we want to explore further?
Yeah, I think the idea of suggestions on, you may already be doing this, but, here are ways.
Right.
Is a good idea.
Okay, all in favor of that? All right. And then just moving on to the pay above industry average. Because I don't want to take that off the list. I want to understand what people think about that, if there's a way we can reword it, or whether we should keep it or delete it.
I like the living wage idea, and also maybe something to the extent of and strive to pay above the industry, or you know what I mean, maybe
We
that's
talked
not-
about a fair wage,
Yeah, but of course, how do you define fair?
Right.
And I think any employer that pays above the industry average, most people would consider them to be a higher employer, right? And so, just because you don't pay above the industry average doesn't mean that you're not a higher employer. It just means that if you do, you're a higher employer, right?
So how?
It's like a pretty good quantitative metric for treating your employees well. If you pay them higher than the average, it's pretty good. So just because you can't, I'm in tech, I can't pay. I'm with you. I I cannot meet this standard, but I don't think it means that I'm not a hybrid employer, right?
So maybe this ties into number 4, but what about creating incentives through continuing education or something somebody could do to get themselves a raise, to get themselves additional earnings, like completing some training or something like that, getting certificates or in their field. Is there any way to describe that in a way that's helpful?
Yeah, I mean, isn't the thought that if you're an employer, you can pick 2 or 3 of these things, and if you do 2 or 3 of these things, you're like hybrid, right? That's the thought. You don't have to do all 10.
Right.
Agreed.
Some mix.
So why don't we reword this? I hope I'm characterizing this correctly. Pay above, at a minimum, pay above the living wage, and strive to pay above.
living wage, at a minimum, pay a living wage.
Those are 2 very different things.
I know they are very different.
Just
So
very
do we
different.
break them out? Maybe they're 2 separate. I mean, if your goal is just to pay above the living wage, does that make you a high road employer?
No, but not
Depends on the
paying
role.
a living wage.
Definitely makes you the opposite of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is where like this breaks down in terms of it so varies by company, right? Like a local restaurant paying a living wage is like actually a high road, right? Or I don't know, maybe not
Yeah.
restaurant, insert.
No, that's true.
Versus other types of companies where like that is a ridiculously low standard, so.
What is
But I
living
think-
wage
oh.
in New York City?
I was gonna say, I think we should make clear that just doing one of these doesn't make you a high road
Right.
employer, like it's some combination
Yeah.
of them. If you don't do one of these, then that doesn't also disqualify you as being one as well.
Right, and Chris just raised the complicating question of, the definition of a living wage is not an objective, God-given standard. It's, there's an economist at MIT who publishes, I think, by county everywhere in the U.S. If you're an individual in New York City, it's $17.46. Minimum wage in New York City right now is $15. But it gives different household demographics and different living wages for that. I mean, I think for simplicity, we would want to go for individual living alone.
And Dave, is that inclusive of like total compensation, or is it straight base wage?
I don't remember, but I can, actually I did send you
Yeah,
the link.
I want it.
I'm happy to share that.
So do we have the ability just to publish that? Like, because I don't know, myself, I don't know what was defined as a living wage, like I understand the term, but so maybe for private businesses or for businesses in general, just understanding how that's defined is helpful.
Yeah.
And there are lots of different definitions of what a
Yes.
living wage is. 1740 would be very low by many standards. So I think it opens a little bit of a complicated set of issues for us if we're putting out something that's unrealistic for a lot of businesses that we still want to encourage to pay their workers better.
And if they can't, we want to encourage them to adopt other practices.
Right, exactly, but you don't want to set something that's so aspirational that just rules out a lot of, I mean, Audrey, what's the wage in your industry now for?
Minimum wage, $15
Yeah.
an hour. But that's why I was asked the question about total compensation, because part of the wage parity laws also state that you have to have $4.09 in supplemental benefits. So
Right.
essentially, every hour of home care services is paid through a wage and a benefit package at $19.09.
Yeah.
I don't think that we can
It's very
go
hard for
through
your industry
every
to-
education in the economy by industry. Like, we're not gonna get there, right?
No.
So it's like.
So maybe we just leave it. We've opened this can of worms, but maybe there is a benefit to just saying pay above industry average. And then we can provide, like you suggested, information about what is the living wage in New York City, if it's by borough, by county, by family size.
Or how about by city standard? The city does publish it, and the city uses it in a lot of its programs, so we can't really be in conflict with that.
Right. Okay. Is everyone in favor of keeping that on the list?
Personally, no.
No?
That could be difficult, but I don't think pay above the industry average is particularly meaningful. And I think the biggest challenge is that people aren't earning a living wage. I think living wage is debatable. I think this MIT standard is a reasonable one. And I don't think you have to tick all 10 boxes to be a high-road employer. But I do think that paying a living wage is a pretty fundamental issue in being a high-road employer. But I can be outvoted, that's fine.
I agree though, I agree. I much prefer a living wage over above industry average. And even though it's thorny, we can hopefully come up with language that makes clear that it is complicated, but there's a principle behind living wage, right? The principle is that it's enough for you to sustain yourself. So we can articulate a commitment to that ideal and still help people to understand that that's still a complicated concept to quantify.
I agree.
But
I think
I
we should
agree.
add paying a living wage to the list. It's like number 11. It's just a different metric than industry average. It's just different.
So, Kristen,
Like, I'm a tech employer. None of my employees make a living wage. They make like 3-4 times that because I'm in tech.
Right.
It's just not an issue.
course.
It's irrelevant to me.
Right.
Well,
But this is relevant to me.
Right.
So I don't get any bonus points because I'm a CEO in tech because I pay a living wage, right?
Right.
That is not, there's no incremental value to me as a higher employer because I pay a living wage. But if I pay above the industry average, then there is some, right? So it's just two different metrics. I think it's a challenge. And I definitely think
It's not
a
an
living
either or.
wage
It's not an either
should
or.
be something that we have. So let me be clear.
Okay, so
It's
then
just-
I
it's
would
a- it's
propose
number
we have a
11.
separate line item that says pay a living wage. And we can work on the wording, we can include information on that for New York City. And then, so we'll have two line items, pay above the industry average, or are we against that? So I know you're against it, what about everybody, others? Yes or
My
no?
only issue is it's like Wall Street, so is it important that you pay above
Well, I don't agree that
industry
it's Wall
average?
Street.
No, but that's an industry, or tech is an industry. Does that make you a high-road employer? It may mean that you just have a really profitable business.
Well, you could work for National Grid, for example, and so we pay, I mean, I know how they set compensation, right? They look at the industry average and then there's a range, right? And so
I
they
won't
could
be in the-
say,
yeah.
right, they could say, we'll pay X% above the industry average
Mm-hmm.
for.
If you're a restaurant worker, if you're in the service industry, and your employer pays you above the industry average, is that something we want to encourage people to do or not? I mean, if you're a low-wage worker, you're paid in the top quartile of your industry.
yes,
Yeah.
Yes.
yes, we
Isn't
absolutely
that
encourage that.
literally the point of what we're trying to do?
Yes.
So-
So I think we need to come back with what does it mean to pay a living wage, right? So there's an MIT definition, there's Aspen's definition, there are a lot of different perspectives. I just think we need to, Chris, just a follow-up, I try to figure out what do we actually mean by that. I think it's a
Okay.
term that's thrown around a lot, but it means a lot of different things to people. Often means making somewhere around $50,000 a year in New York City, which is going to be beyond most employers, or many employers.
Okay, so this first one, we've now divided into three. We've got pay equity, we've got living wage, and industry average. And I think that's an improvement to what, so it's good. And we'll come back with refined language.
Maurice, I'm sorry, everyone, I have another meeting in town that I have to go to. So I'm really upset because I wanted to go through this. And at this rate, I think we're gonna have about 25 items. So I'm looking forward to what's gonna come out of this. Sorry, everyone.
Congratulations, yes. Okay, so what is listed as number 2 is offer paid vacation. This to me seems like a no-brainer, but
Should we put some sort of amount?
City council or the mayor
Yeah, it's
proposing
right now.
10 days. Could say at a minimum of 5 or 10.
I mean, so many people don't get paid
25.
vacation at all.
25.
25, yeah. All right, let's do it.
It feels like the broader category would be more flexible, there's something about flexibility, or like vacation feels like a,
Paid time off, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that what we want to call it? Paid time off.
Again, you know, so there's a legal definition of all these things that the city is, you know, either adopted or is pushing through now. I mean, aren't we really talking about just being in excess of what's legally required?
I don't know if paid time off, is paid time off
Personal
legally?
days, yeah.
I thought it's not sick
No.
days, it's personal days?
No, so my understanding is sick days was recently enacted.
That's my understanding.
Paid
sick
time
days.
off is not law.
Right,
Not
that's
yet.
what I thought too.
Correct, it may be.
Right. So assume that everybody's getting some sort of paid sick time, right, under the law. And then you want these additional days off, which could be your vacation, it could be because you're running to whatever, you know, parent-teacher conferences.
But I just think for simplicity, you know, they're changing all the time, right? There's new legislation every week sometimes. You know, what we're trying to encourage people to do is something that they're not required to do, right? Above and beyond, whatever the legal requirements are. And I think if we get too specific, we end up getting caught in some sort of our own words. And I think, you know, maybe trying to keep it generalized, but if we want to offer up what some of those numbers are as a part of the description, I think that's not a bad thing. But I think just trying to say, you know, encourage people to do more than what they're supposed to be doing. That's really what this is all about.
I like the direction that Chauncey was going in, around flexibility, again, depends on the sector, but in retail, flexible scheduling, or block scheduling, predictable scheduling is so much more important, right? So a retailer could offer paid vacation, but if you have to ask for it 2 weeks in advance, or you get dock pay, that goes nowhere. So I do think, and similar to the living wage, caring about this, I think in the lower wage workers, and I think the flexibility is, I think, at the core of the idea for workers. So something that broadens this out. I do think something around kind of scheduling and time off is separate from healthcare. So I do think that in the same way that we got some nuance around wages, I do think that there's probably some nuance to work through in this one. And so I don't know, just looking at the time, and do we sort of tag where we need some nuance to try to get through the right list, or do we just try to get through a bunch of the lists and go deep on that? Feels like there's a moment in this meeting that we should decide which way to go.
I think you could also add, so instead of saying offer paid vacation, so offer, you know, paid flexibility time that may include paid vacation, and set some sort of standards that further define that also include paid vacation. So it would be like paid vacation, flexible, like the adoption of a flexible work schedule, and other things that allow, like other policies that allow for some sort of wage, you know, some sort of benefit towards just, you know, flexible at work, or just, it needs to be further defined. So not just paid vacation.
So paid time off, flexible scheduling, what was the third one that you had? I thought there was a third category that you just mentioned. Was there?
Specifically for that.
Right.
I mean, often in retail, it's predictable scheduling, so
okay.
being able to kind of block.
Yes, that makes sense.
Different and flexible.
So again, it's almost like what we want to encourage is the best kind of combination in this bucket of paid time off and scheduling practices. And we can, I agree, we should just take that offline and reword it, and we can come back with the wording, but we would, I think that's a good suggestion, that we change it that way. And we can say in excess of, you know, what's required by law.
But there's a version of Les's point, which is that, are we trying to say that some of these are floors, or are these aspirations? Right, are we saying, you know, you've got to be over this floor, or should we say you should be moving towards, you know, above the average? And maybe that, you know, issue to issue, we would need to sort of articulate that.
Yeah. Okay, this is another one. Offer healthcare benefits beyond what is required by law. So this is a ceiling versus floor. Yeah. Any issues on this one?
It seems vague. I mean, I don't know if we want to set something like, and I don't know what the law requires, but you know, a number of companies will pay 80% of an individual's premium, some will pay 100%, some pay 50% of family members, some pay 0, some, I mean, I don't think we'll decide it in this meeting, but is it that we want to set a bar of this is what we think?
Yeah, I don't think anything is required by the law.
Pardon?
I don't think anything is required by the law. So even just saying offering healthcare benefits is better. Yeah. So I think that we could probably just start there.
And do we want to further define what these benefits are?
Well, that's where I thought you were going to go, like dental.
Yeah, dental, vision.
Right.
That's a crazy morass. I mean, I don't know. You know.
Not easy, yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the highest expenses, right, for most companies is, well, assuming your company offers that.
Yep.
I mean, you know, you can start getting into deductibles, and I mean, that's a no-win proposition.
The bumped up issue here is just employee supports, a similar kind of around kind of employee assistance plans that are a variety of supports to help the person, whether that's around counseling, emergency aid, or flexible programs like that. So I wonder if there's just a bump up in what this is trying to get at.
Right, like emergency daycare, like you said, emergency EAP, which is
Employee assistance program,
right.
Yeah. That seems like an important best practice that depending upon the business might not be as complicated.
I have to exit as well. Do we have a sense of how we're going to get the specific language for all the entities? Is there like a Google survey, or will it be like in the meetings that we define the specific language for each item?
Maybe a committee should be formed?
I think we need to form committees, yeah. How should we do this? Because I don't know, we need more than one committee, don't you think? Or is one committee enough?
Eventually. We want to get a committee that is short-lived, that tries to flesh these out a bit more and look at some of the research and work that's already been done.
Yeah, we could do that.
What if, I like Stanell's suggestion of, I mean, some of us may not want to join a committee, but might have ideas about particular issues, and maybe having an online way to collect it and share thoughts, I think could be really positive. And it is also possible we could group it into maybe 3 committees. You know, one around wages and benefits, one around training and advancement, one around hiring and diversity.
It certainly would help us figure out if we need a committee. The answers are kind of all over the place.
Right. These all seem
So
reasonable
far
when I
it
first
seems
read them,
like-
and now they're like, oh, wait, well, yeah, I think the probing of it to see where you really sit.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then I also think this question that you guys were raising earlier about like ceiling as aspirational, are we shooting for the floor, and then like what's the scope of like something too difficult for us to try to set a scope like healthcare, but there's other things where we do like pay. You know, I think there's like a strict strategic thing that we have to figure out on those 3 items as well. versus floor for each item, and then like, are we gonna set a scope or not, is the primary question.
All right, so I'm not technical at all. Chris claims that he can do some sort of online survey that we can all make comments on. And so we'll do that. And then I would also ask that, I like your idea of having maybe 3 committees for each of the different groups. And so I think, why don't we start with volunteers? If you would like to volunteer for a committee that can take a deeper look into some of these categories, and one would be hiring and diversity, one would be wage and benefits, and then we might combine training and advancement with worker autonomy. If you could send an email to Chris, we really do need volunteers to work on these committees, so if you could send an email to Chris indicating your willingness to participate, I think that would be great. And if anyone is willing to volunteer right now, I will take volunteers. Great, thank you.
Hiring and diversity.
Okay.
Same.
You both want to do diversity.
I'm interested in wages.
Okay.
I'm interested in wages and worker ownership.
So am I, can we combine that?
We can
maybe?
combine those two,
Worker,
yep.
like Sansa.
Yeah, we
workers'
can combine
benefits.
those two. Okay.
I'm just saying wages and benefits and ownership.
You want to do wages and benefits, okay. So,
I'll
do
do
you
the-
have a preference?
I'll take any committee that would
Okay,
like
so
to.
we'll put you on training and advancement. Anyone else on training? Yep, okay, all right, we've got two.
The other, the other thing I just want to make a comment, we were kind of talking about, what is required by law. And I don't know if we should necessarily just move away from that, because just because it's required doesn't mean that all employers are necessarily doing it. There are thousands and thousands of businesses. The likelihood that there's litigation or that you are identified as not doing these practices is fairly small, particularly in some low-wage employing jobs. So maybe it's just an overlay of promoting just more transparency, particularly for the employees, that they know that you're paying, that you have pay equity and you're doing the things that are required by law. Maybe something that seems simple and obvious, but employees may not be doing that. So, and then from an employee standpoint, it may just give you more comfort to know that your employer is living up to these particular standards. So that's kind of.
I just want to pile on. I think that's a really important point because there's such a lack of compliance with whatever laws get passed in the small business sector, right? Is part of what you guys want us to do with this high road practice to show the economic and financial benefits of being in compliance with these city policies. Does that make sense? To be like, I comply with this law, and now my business is making more money. That's why you should comply with the law, because it's actually good for you, good for your working, good for your business, blah blah blah. And that's kind of the floor strategy that we talked about versus the ceiling. But like,
Well, the controversies around paying minimum wage, right? That there's the issue of, well, if I pay minimum wage, my business is not going to be as profitable.
or
That's a good
vacation,
point.
or
Right.
exactly. Living wage.
Quick question, and we may get the words wrong, but the B Corp designation in New York State, other version of this, how does that, set the criteria and square with this? Is there any overlap? Should we look for convergence or differentiation?
Are you talking about the Best for NYC
I think that's what I'm talking about,
campaign?
yes.
So that's something that our office has managed for the last few years, and so we're sort of looking for this effort to kind of supersede that.
Okay. Because is there anything to learn from that effort? Did they go into more specific criteria like here?
It was a lot of criteria. I think it was a light version of the B impact assessment, which is like a very, Dave can tell you about it, maybe others can, but a very extensive assessment that takes a lot of time to fill out. We can go back and look. I mean, we can go back and look at some of the data. Yeah, we can go back.
I would say they're complementary. And one of the challenges, I mean, Les raised it relative to healthcare, is that these are very complicated issues. And I think I'm a big believer in crawl, walk, run. And maybe we pick our spots as we start out, and then we can expand our list over time. But I think part of the challenge in getting traction is the more complicated you make this, the harder it is to measure and to pitch to others.
Well, that's interesting, Chris, is your goal in some ways to think about this as, you know, the designation, what the city did, those are, you know, transaction cost entry. It took a lot to get in there. You're trying to imagine this as like something that could nudge employers, but isn't as complicated procedurally as those other projects?
I want this to be as easy as possible. And I don't know, I don't know how, yeah, it was a little bit complicated. It did take a little bit of time. So I think we want it to be as easy and clear as possible for organizations to adopt practices that we think will help them and their workers.
So I think that's a helpful framing for, you know, what we're trying to accomplish. Maybe next time it would be worth putting some time having you talk about those efforts. What was good, what didn't you remark?
Yeah.
So a little restraint on our part.
Chris, I also have a question. Are we targeting just smaller companies, or because, like, let's say in the hospitality industry, I think we are already paying above and beyond. Because, like, let's say an average worker makes about $35 an hour, so we are way above the living wage. So I think we should
way above for the average worker.
Yeah.
How about the lowest paid?
Lowest paid would probably be about $30.
Really?
Yeah.
Great.
You know, so I think maybe while we're looking at these targeting these companies, we should also look at how can we incentivize the other companies who are already above and beyond.
Yeah, I think the scope is meant to be inclusive of all businesses regardless of size and regardless of sector. We understand, and the executive committee really drove this home last week, which is these apply differently to different businesses.
Correct.
Right? And so if you are a unionized company that has really strong protections for your workers and great benefits and good wages, then, you know, there's still maybe room to grow, but in a different way.
Correct. But you see, the room to grow, that's why I'm suggesting that maybe we can choose is some sort of incentive, you know, for the companies who are already doing above and beyond. Does that make sense?
An incentive, say more, what do you mean by?
Well, like, let's say, I mean, companies always want to get some benefits for hiring more people, you know, so if you want to encourage me to hire more people, you know, do I get tax break? Do I get something, you know? I mean, it's all about negotiating.
But I think what we want to show is the incentive is either greater productivity, greater worker satisfaction. I don't know if we could ever be in a position where we could be offering a tax break for accomplishing something.
Well, that was just an example, but I think we should also think about creative ways of maybe giving something back to the company.
Well, I think recognition.
Recognition, exactly, yeah. Something like that.
Definitely recognition.
Yeah.
So, any other comments before we wrap up? I think we've got committees established, and if you're still interested, you can email Chris. And we'll take this work, because it looks like it's a lot of work, offline. And we'll come back at the next board meeting with a refined list and kind of newly worded practices. And we can go from there.
And there will be an opportunity for those of us who are not on a committee or any committee to provide input.
Yes. So what I envision is that for all of these, and it grouped into the 3 committees, we would have set up something online for everybody to weigh in. And then each committee in turn could take that as part of the grist for thinking through the next steps in fleshing out each of the practices. Everybody will have the ability to opine on any of the practices.
Okay. All right, so I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. I have a note here from Chris that the 2020 quarterly meetings have not been scheduled yet. Chris will work with Audria and Mark to schedule those meetings, and we'll distribute calendar invitations. And that's it for today. So do I have a meeting or a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor? All right, happy holidays, everyone, happy new year, and see you in 2020.
Nice to meet you.